Great. So welcome and thank you for joining us to our first virtual session of our 6th annual New York Seafood Summit. My name is Mike Saramella. I'm the Seafood Safety and Technology Specialist with New York Sea Grant and going to be your host for today's session. For those who are not familiar with New York Sea Grant is one of 34 university-based programs under NOAA's National Sea Grant College Program. New York Sea Grant is a cooperative program between NOAA, Cornell University, and the SUNY system. For 50 years, New York Sea Grant has worked to support novel research of use to coastal communities and economies, and has provided technical support through multidisciplinary extension and education programming. You can check the chat box now for a link to New York Sea Grant's website to learn more about who we are and what we do. For those of you who are not familiar with the New York Seafood Summit, it was initiated in 2016 as a means of engaging and facilitating discussions among seafood stakeholders in New York. This includes those involved in seafood production, processing, sales, preparation, and those simply interested in learning more about New York seafood. While the summit has traditionally consisted of an in-person 2 to 3 hour session in Manhattan, this year's summit activities were expanded throughout the week with 3 separate in-person sessions and 2 virtual. Tomorrow's session will be in person at the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York, and Friday will be our second virtual session and final session of the summit, which will focus on New York fisheries. You can check the chat box now for a link to the summit website with additional details on each event and how you can register. Lastly, while the summit we work hard to ensure the summit events are accessible and free to participants, we do rely heavily on volunteer support, donations, and external funding to support these activities. If you're able, we encourage participants to show their support for the summit and keep it going for years to come by donating. Any amount helps, and donations can be made online using the link in the chat box now. This week's events would not be possible without the continued support of our Seafood Summit partners and the planning team. I would like to give each of them the opportunity to introduce themselves and their organizations now. And I'll start with Dr. Stephen Fertini from the Center for Aquatic Animal Research and Management, or CFARM, who worked with New York Sea Grant in 2016 to initiate the New York Seafood Summit and has been actively involved in the planning and execution of the event ever since.
Hi, everybody. It's Stephen. I'm really excited to have everybody here to talk about this topic. I'm a veterinarian, and seaweed is not generally one of the things that I know all that much about, but I'm very interested to see how it moves forward in production in New York State, and if we can get involved in supporting through any type of disease monitoring of seaweed, we'd love to do that. But it's a great addition to the summit this year, and I hope you can all join us in Hyde Park tomorrow at the Culinary Institute to talk more about some of the types of species I do work with, mainly finfish. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Steve. Next, I'd like to pass the screen to Claire Harton with Green Rabbits, who joined the planning team in 2017 and hosted our second Seafood Summit with the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Claire?
Hi, I work with a team of food systems planners, but coming from an interdisciplinary design practice. And when I first started working around seafood, it was 20 years ago with the UK government and their design council. And we were looking at an 8th generation oyster grower and scallop divers. And at that point, the discussion was more around how to eat more and protect more local seafood production. So it's interesting to see over the transit of 20 years where the discussion has come now, and with this particular platform of New York Seafood Summit, to looking at, such as today, seaweed and how it protects whole ecosystems and can nourish biodiversity while producing food for humans. So from a systems thinking perspective, I'm very excited about today.
Thanks, Claire. Next, I'd like to introduce my colleagues from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Suffolk County's Marine Program. Kristen, Scott, and Tara are fisheries specialists with CCE and joined the team this year to help increase involvement and representation of our New York fishermen.
Hi, everybody. This is Kristen Gerbino, fisheries specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension. As Mike said, I'm excited to be part of the planning team starting this year. I'm excited and enthusiastic about bringing more commercial fisheries representation to the summit. I work heavily on the Choose Local Fish initiative that Cornell has initiated, and that is to raise awareness and increase demand for locally harvested fish and shellfish on Long Island. And I'm happy to be here with all of you guys and learning more about all of the topics that we're covering at this week's summit. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kristen. And Scott and Tara, are they joining us today? Or they like to say anything?
I don't think they're on today.
All right. Well, thank you, Kristen, as well as Scott and Tara for all the work they've done. Next, I'd like to pass it to our aquaculture specialist, Emma Forbes, who is with New York Sea Grant and joined our planning team in 2020.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. My name is Emma Forbes, and I'm New York Sea Grant's aquaculture specialist. My role is to support the developing aquaculture industry throughout New York State. So I work with industry members and stakeholders from the Great Lakes all the way to Eastern Long Island. This position was created a year and a half ago, so I'm working to develop a new extension program for current and emerging aquaculture industry designed to support its sustainability and success. With the development of the extension program, there are countless opportunities for relationships and collaborations, and I am especially excited about the potential that Seaweed has in New York and hearing from everyone today. Thank you to the Seafood Summit team. I've been really enjoying my second year helping plan it. It's come together great. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Emma. So we have a couple members who couldn't make the call today, but I'd still like to recognize them. Liz Carollo with Grow NYC, who joined the summit team in 2018. They hosted the summit at Project Farmhouse for several years and continue to be actively involved in the summit planning. And lastly, new this year, the Department of Agriculture and Markets, Jessica Hennessy, Jessica Brooks, and Anique Jabot have joined the team and have been an asset in securing a space at the Javits Center for the International Restaurant and Food Service Show for our kickoff event this past Monday. So I want to thank again Steve, Claire, Liz, Jessica, Anique, Kristen, Scott, Tara, and Emma for all their support and the time they've dedicated to planning this year's New York Seafood Summit. Before we get started, I'd like to review some ground rules for today's event. This is set up as a meeting, which allows participants to share video and audio, so we can hopefully facilitate more engaging and interactive question and answer sessions. However, we do ask that you keep yourself muted when you are not speaking. If you have questions, feel free to share them in the chat box at any time. The chat box can be found in the Zoom control panel as depicted on this slide, or you can raise your hand using the reactions button shown here. During the question and answer session, we will ask those who raise their hands to unmute and share their questions as we see them raised. Finally, we ask that all participants and presenters show respect to one another as we engage and learn throughout the week. Now to start off this week's activities. Today's event will focus on an emerging seaweed industry in New York. There's been growing interest in the production of seaweeds over the past decade, and with recent passing of the Kelp Bill in New York, which made seaweed farming legal in Long Island's largest aquaculture leasing program, interest in building this industry in New York is growing. Over the past few years, there have been many efforts to support the industry, and we have 7 panelists here today representing different sectors of this emerging industry to share their stories and provide updates on these efforts. I'm going to let each of the panelists share a bit more about themselves and their organization now and open the floor to questions at the end. We will start with Jessie McCabe with the Crop Project. Jessie, the screen is yours.
Hi, thank you for having me, and nice to meet you all and giving me this kickoff spot. So I'm Jessie. I lead operations for the Crop Project. Many of you likely know my colleague, Casey Emmett. He is at Expo West today, promoting seaweed. And so I'm glad that I get the chance to meet you all. I know that the first thing he would say would be to say thank you for all the support that you've given the Crop Project so far and helping us get where we are today. So I'll just share a little bit about our business and what we're up to this year. For those of you who have not interacted with us yet, the mission of the Crop Project is to unlock the potential of regenerative agriculture. And we see kelp as the ultimate regenerative crop for reasons likely very well known by this group. It's zero input, it captures carbon, it builds biodiversity, all while empowering small farmers and providing alternate sources of income. So the problem that we as the Crop Project are specifically trying to solve is enabling CPG companies to actually use kelp by transforming it into a high quality, easy to incorporate ingredient. And in parallel, we know that that furthers a handful of social and environmental benefits, again, that are well known by the people on this call. So our role is specifically trying to be able to connect that supply with the potential demand. We know that there are a lot of people interested in potentially growing this and a lot of companies that are interested in using it for its benefits, but there needs to be kind of that missing link that makes that happen. So we're hoping we can play that role. So specifically what we do, we buy seaweed from farmers at a living wage. We transform that into a dry powder through a multi-step drying process. And then we sell it as a super functional ingredient to customers across channels. This year, we will be in our third year of operations. We have a network of about 15 farmers from Nova Scotia down into Connecticut, and we're working on developing seed supply so we can continue to grow that network into next year. We plan to process about 300,000 wet pounds and then sell that into food, beauty, and fertilizer customers. To be super clear, we are not processing in New York. All of our processing is in Maine right now. But we are here to continue to partner on how we develop this industry and look to all of you to just let us know how we can help. So thank you for including us in this conversation, and I'm happy to answer any questions about Crop Project itself or myself or whatever questions you have.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. So now I'd like to pass the screen to Sean Barrett with Montauk Seaweed Supply Company.
Hey everybody, my name is Sean Barrett, as Michael said, from the Montauk Seaweed Supply Company, but I know a lot of folks on this call and have worked with some of you guys for a long time. In the seafood space, as Dock to Dish, I'm a co-founder at Dock to Dish, which is the first community supported fishery program for New York. So I see a lot of our friends here formerly from the seafood realm, especially Linda LaViolette. We were just talking about how we haven't seen you in a while, so we miss you in your retirement. Good to see you here today. But how fun is this and interesting yet? And Jesse, nice to meet and see you. I'm used to doing these events with Casey, who's I'm a big fan of his and a big fan of the Crop Project. David Berg and the Moore Foundation's here today. And we also have on here Stephen Schott, who's probably the most renowned seaweed expert, certainly I've ever met, but a degreed marine botanist in our link today. So I hope I get everything right here, Stephen. I'm sure if I don't, I'll hear from you after the call. So yeah, the Montauk Seaweed Supply Company, kind of like Jesse had described, we have a similar background. But I think what we've learned over the years working in seaweed, we call it the 3 Fs for output. Category 1 of the 3 Fs is food, where Casey and Jesse are squarely positioned. The center sector is feed and fertilizer, where we're focused. And the third major output historically for kelp products is fuel, biofuels and things like that, which is another realm that no one I know in New York is interested in that yet, but I'm sure it's in the pipeline. So for right now, we've kind of stepped into the fertilizer and feed space. We work with, we just created the first commercial kelp farm in New York State. We're helped and sponsored these guys to get started. We're struggling a little bit with ice, David, as I'm sure might touch on later with his presentation. But we also work with a network of kelp farmers from Maine to Connecticut, and we focus on the waste stream. So there's a lot of culinary grade kelp that they're creating for the food sector. We're really focused on the waste sector, on the secondary parts of these crops, which we are then converting into fertilizers and feed. So the Montauk Seaweed Supply Company is the first fully licensed and certified by Ag and Markets that we know of commercial fertilizer distributor in New York State to produce organic soil amendment products and livestock feed using exclusively local ingredients from the sea. We work closely with Cornell, obviously, and DEC. There's a few overlapping agencies here that we kind of work closely with to make sure we're getting this right. And we're happy to announce that this past year that we launched the first, that we know of actually, the first ever regenerative biostimulant fertilizer product made out of sugar kelp. It's called Regency. I think Mike may have our website up, but if anyone's interested, montaukseaweed.com. There's a lot of videos and graphics and things that explain this. It's a really simple concept, but it's got some elements to it that can be a little easier explained with the videos and the graphics on our website. But essentially what we're trying to do is create a closed nitrogen loop for phytoremediation. I don't know how familiar folks are with this, but Eastern Suffolk County suffers from the highest nitrogen rates, some very serious nitrogen loading in our local waters. So our goal is twofold, really. It's nitrogen sequestering and carbon capture. Our biggest interest in the whole kelp conversation is carbon capture, obviously climate change and removing carbon out of our ecosystems. So most folks, as I think most of you know, kelp is a very aggressive carbon capture plant, 5 times more aggressive than any land-based plant. It's very fast growing. So over the years in our explorations of not only how do you use these kelp farms as a sink to capture nitrogen and carbon, but then the bigger question became for us always, what do you do with it after you've captured it? So it's our experience, but I will say we are kind of out on a limb experimenting and pioneering here. Our hope is to prove that the best route for this, for at least for the waste stream kelp, is in the soil. So there's many benefits to kelp, and this is an ancient indigenous practice, putting nutrients from the sea into the soil to help vegetables and grass, whatever you want to grow basically out of the soil. Kelp and seaweed will do, and Mike did some test samples with some of our products last summer. I think he had some good results in his garden. And those are all nice peripheral benefits, but our main driver here is carbon capture and nitrogen sequestering out of local waterways using kelp as a phytoremediation tool and a climate change to combat climate change and capture carbon ultimately. So we're super excited about this work, and having transitioned out of wild seafood with Dr. Dish and now into this fascinating world of kelp and seaweed development. I would just like to echo what Jesse said, is that we are very grateful to not only the folks who put this together today, but for all of you guys coming out and attending. As Stephen Schott has been in this realm for decades, and I think sometimes still is a little surprised by how much sudden excitement and enthusiasm there is in the seaweed space. But that's what's driving us and really helping us, is the interest and the involvement. We want to make this tent as big as possible and get as many people as we possibly can involved. So it's just great to be here today. We're super grateful for everyone who put it together, but equally grateful to all the new folks and people who are just getting interested and involved. Please join us, and onward ho. That's all I got, Mike. Over and out.
Great. Thank you, Sean. All right. And thank you, Debbie, for the question, and Jesse's answering that in the chat box, but we will also come to questions at the end. So we'll share a little more then. Next, I'd like to share the screen with Jonas Gunther from We Are the New Farmers to share a little bit more about his operation.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonas. I'm one of the founders of We Are the New Farmers, and we might be a little bit the odd ones out here on the call because we're not actually cultivating seaweeds, while we are in the algae space. We are dedicated to the cultivation of microalgae, specifically the microalgae spirulina. We are actually an indoor farming company located in Brooklyn in Sunset Park, where we have like an indoor warehouse facility where we cultivate this type of microalgae. And just in case you're not familiar with microalgae as much as you are obviously with seaweeds and kelp, They are a similar family, but microscopic, super tiny, and packed with nutrients and vitamins. And another thing that they have in common with kelp is that they are one of our strongest tools to combat climate change. We often like to say we build carbon eating machines on land because we try to find as many ways as possible to feed captured carbon into our cultures, whether that is through CO2, whether that is through sodium bicarbonate, and then we turn that into highly nutritious products. And I'm seeing Michael's already.
Jonas, we lost Sal.
There we go. Sorry, I hit mute while I was sharing our website. Yeah, so once we sequester the carbon, we turn that into nutritional and sustainable food products. Spirulina is very well known in the supplement world. What we do differently is because we're local to the United States, local to New York City, we try to offer the product fresh instead of as a dried powder. And fresh has a variety of benefits for customers. It tastes a lot better. It's much more nutritious. It has much more versatility for chefs and restaurants, as well as at home and in the kitchen. Yeah, we're a D2C business. People come to our website, place an order for fresh frozen spirulina, and then we ship it all across the country. If you're interested in checking out a little bit more detail what we do, I just shared our website. In addition to that, we're also in the middle of a crowdfunding campaign. So if you want to support our efforts to scale our operations and capture more carbon and turn that into delicious and sustainable foods, check out our Republic campaign, which you find on our website or in the link. Or if you're interested in just chatting with us about microalgae, about spirulina and what we do, please just feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or in any other way that makes sense. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jonas. All right. So next, I will move on to David Berg with the Moore Foundation.
David, you're muted.
Okay, well, that was
There we
silly
go.
of me. All right, and now I got to share my screen because unlike everybody else, I actually can't speak off the cuff. I need assistance here. So I'm going to talk to you about Lazy Point Farms, which is a project of the Moore Family Charitable Foundation. And I think we already heard from a number of people why grow kelp, but just to reiterate, it's good for the environment, specifically our marine environment. We don't need any inputs to grow it. It grows in pretty much all of New York's local waters, except those that we can't grow it in yet, but more about that later. It's a winter crop for our oyster growers, who are probably the people that will be growing kelp in a commercial scale in New York, like elsewhere as well. It's a good food, which is why we're here today in various forms. And of course, it's used for a number of other things, including fertilizer. Thank you, fertilizer guys, specifically Sean. So what are the goals of Lazy Point Farms and the Moore Foundation? Encourage the cultivation of sugar kelp, as I said, to benefit New York's waters. This is one of, yes?
You're not sharing your screen right now. Were you planning on?
Oh yeah, you're not seeing my screen?
Nope.
Oh, that's no good. Well, clearly I'm not very good at this. Let me go there. Wow, share screen. I had clicked on this, but I guess it didn't work. Share. All right. Wow. All right.
There you go.
There we go. Well, all you missed was a few slides showing yet more seaweed. So anyhow, let me go to the full screen view here. If that works. No, it doesn't work. There we go. All right. So I think I am back. All right, let me see here. I'm so sorry. I'm not very good at this here. So where are we this season? Well, in the past couple of years, we set up nurseries at 4 locations, Cornell Cooperative Extension, and we're going to hear from Steve Schott in a little bit. The Hart Lobster Company, which doesn't raise lobsters anymore since we don't have any in New York. They're actually a shellfish hatchery and are now a seaweed nursery. And Lizzie produced 120 spools this season, so I think that's a really good start. Also, the towns of Islip and Hempstead, both their shellfish hatcheries. Also, we helped them set up seaweed nurseries in the past couple of years. This year, we have 14 growers around the island. 6 are oyster farmers, 3 townships, 2 environmental organizations, a garden club, a college, and high school. So a lot of different entities. And growers are pretty much all the way from Queens out to Montauk. And kelp is started in these nurseries. It takes a good 5 weeks in a nursery and is deployed out into open water when it's about a 1/4 inch, maybe even smaller. And hopefully in December this year, we had 1 spool launched in late November. So it's harvested then in the spring, in April and May. April primarily for food because we don't have a lot of other organisms to deal with, but also early to mid-May. So we are working with a number of different entities, Cornell Cooperative Extension being our primary partner in this. And again, we'll hear from Steve in a little bit. The towns I mentioned, in addition to East Hampton, we assisted them with the setup this year of their seaweed nursery. Also a number of colleges on Long Island, also Cornell, and we'll hear from Cornell. Also the University of New England up in Maine and LaGuardia Community College in Queens. New York Sea Grant. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you. Mike's been amazing in terms of helping with food regulations in New York. Long Island Oyster Growers Association, because now and in the future, most of the growers are going to be or are oyster growers, and the East End Food Institute. And that brings me to what should be the last slide, but for some reason it's not going. There we go. Yes, the East End Food Institute out in Southampton is a nonprofit that hopefully most of you are familiar with. They are going to process some of our harvest this season in April. A lot of food safety procedures that we've been investigating with a number of you on this call. And so we have procedures that we're going to be following. The East End Food Institute is licensed and registered food processor with the state. We're going to have a number of different food products available this year for trials, not for sale, because all of the entities that we work with, the growers, are not commercial growers, and these are strictly research trials at this point. That will change hopefully in the coming years. So we'll have all of it will be blanched, vacuum sealed, and frozen. Some will be cut into strips for those of you interested in like a pasta substitute. And I know Jonas will be happy to hear that we're going to have some blanched and pureed. Also, we hope to have the stipes, which are the stems where it attaches to the lines, have that pickled and available, and then possibly dried and ground for food producers interested in spices or other possible products. And there should be a posting in the chat. So let's see, with a link to the website. That's what I have.
Great. Thank you,
All right.
David.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Right. So thanks, David. And that's a good transition into our next speaker. This is going to be Erin Sawyer with the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. She's going to talk a little bit more about the agency perspective and kind of efforts going on with seaweed and getting seaweed processed and sold in New York. Erin.
Thanks, Mike. This is pretty interesting. So you guys are all the experts on the seaweed and those associated products, and we're more general knowledge and just food safety. So this has been good for me too. As far as what we do, I am the Director of Field Operations for the Division of Food Safety and Inspection within Agriculture and Markets. So what I'm going to talk about today is really going to be focused on the food safety aspect of processing these products for human food. This division does oversee human and animal feed too. So if you had questions on something you were looking to do in that field, you could get a hold of our feed people through the same division. Obviously, the department does have other oversight in relation to this product, and I'm not as familiar with those aspects of it. So I will just limit it to kind of the food processing and the food safety issues that we've seen. So this is something that's fairly new for us as far as what we're seeing in New York State too. Obviously, you guys have been doing a lot of work behind the scenes and getting this going, which is a good thing for industry. And then for processing, because this is something that we don't have specific regulations just for seaweed or seaweed processing, we have to fit that into the regulations that we have as far as food safety in general. So for New York State, and again on food products, does not include supplements. I think Jesse, you had mentioned that you were making some supplement products. Also mentioned that you weren't making it in New York State, which is kind of good to know. You know, Maine's a little bit different as far as some of their requirements, but we don't oversee anything that is considered an herbal supplement or a health supplement. So this is really just food. So for things like, if you were using it for sushi or products like that. That kind of processing in New York State does require a food processing license, and it does require a commercial location. There's a couple of ways that can happen. You can do it yourself and have that license. You can have a co-packer who that co-packer would have the license. But ultimately, the actual processor would need to be licensed, and we would do a routine inspection. And that inspection frequency is determined by the types of products that you're doing. So something that is vacuum packaged, sold as shelf stable is going to be inspected more often than something, for example, that's processed to be frozen. So again, that's kind of fitting the product into to our regulations on what we've got. As far as sourcing, we're looking at making sure it's coming from approved sources. We would be concerned with things like environmental contaminants, as I'm sure all of you are. If there were flooding in the summertime, for example, or during the season where things like wastewater were introduced to the fields, we want to make sure that anything that's being harvested has those kinds of hazards addressed. Again, kind of depending on what the type of processing is for the food. There may be process reviews, which is for us having a food safety scientist. Usually it's a PhD or somebody who has a lot of experience. Just kind of look at the food processing as it's being done to assure that it's got the safety parameters from a pathogen and chemical standpoint. Typically could have physical hazards in there. They're a little bit less common, especially with this type of a product, to make sure that those safety parameters are identified and then during the processing they're being monitored and can prove that to the inspector at the time of the inspection. As far as other requirements, the other thing that we would be concerned with anybody who is looking to sell the product wholesale, the Food Safety Modernization Act is in effect. New York State has adopted those rules. And there are some exemptions based on size and where products are being sold, some of the definitions, but fairly large manufacturers for sure, if you're wholesaling products, would fall under that Food Safety Modernization Act. Also called preventative controls for human food would be what we would be focusing on, and you would have to be able to comply with those sets of regulations. If you're strictly retail, not making food products, and certainly there's some other exemptions that can go in with that too, you may be exempt from those requirements. But if you have questions, certainly anyone in the division can help you out with that. Whether you're making the product for wholesale or for retail, we do recommend that operators have a hazard analysis, critical control point has a plan for making the product, just so that the processors are thinking about what the hazards could be and how to control them, and kind of have a plan ahead of time in case anything could go wrong in processing, which, you know, for us, that is something that we see quite often. The world has come a very far way to making sure that those plans are in place ahead of time to keep adulterated product from getting out. We do have requirements on food labeling in New York State. It's the same thing as the FDA food labeling requirements. We've adopted those federal regulations by reference. But if you have questions on kind of what's needed with that, you can look at the CFRs. You can look at Food Safety's website, agriculture.ny.gov. There's a short section on food labeling. It's really pretty basic. It needs to have what it is, the amount that you're selling, if there were any added ingredients beyond just the seaweed or algae that you were growing, and then the name and address of the responsible party. Could be your company, it could be the manufacturer, it could be the somebody who's distributing your product under their name. And then the last thing we kind of wanted to hit on is anybody who is making food for wholesale is required to register with the FDA. FDA's website has got some information on that. We've got links on our website on how to do that. But it's really about regulations that are in place for all food manufacturers, not specific to the seaweed products. But I would certainly encourage you, if you've got questions or you're interested in kind of seeing what requirements you might need to come up with if you have a new product line or you're looking to get into human food or animal feed, you can always reach out to the division, and we can put some contacts into the chat box if you had any questions.
Great, thank you, Erin. Thanks. So we're transitioning away from kind of our industry highlights into our agency perspective, and now we're going to go into a little bit more on the research end and some of the research that has been conducted and is being conducted. So next, I'll share the screen with Chiara Caruso with Cornell Food Science, who's doing some research now on value-added production of seaweeds.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Chiara. I'm gonna try and share my screen here and then get started. So yeah, I am really happy to be here today. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. How about now? Sorry. Okay, there we go. Okay. Alrighty. So yeah, I am really happy to be here today. I'm studying under Dr. Padilla Zakura, who's teaching today, but she regrets not being able to be here. I'm very excited to be here, learning and connecting with you all. I'm pretty new to the seaweed world, so it's a great day for my own learning. Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you all about my research efforts on some different value-added products of seaweed. I am just going to go through some kind of beginning details for anyone who's unfamiliar with and kind of a beginner in the seaweed sector like I was at the beginning of this year, just kind of talk through what's out there and some kind of surface level details of processing, and then yeah, dive into a brief overview of the food science and my research. So let's start. Yeah, so just a quick overview of some options of some seaweed value-added products. A lot of products are condiments, seasonings, toppings. I heard people are making powders, and there are a lot of non-food things you can do with seaweed as well. There's an increasing variety of value-added products. So products that, with the addition of kelp, are more valuable. We see a lot of place-based brands. So as you can see in some of these photos, you know, the place where the product is from is highlighted as like a cool part of the product. So yeah, there's a variety of available products and opportunities to make New York seaweed a part of this growth, which is super exciting. Just a quick overview of some benefits and challenges of using seaweed. Again, I know a lot of you probably know more than I about this, but what I've been learning is yeah, seaweed is a low acid food, and it's low in calories. So yeah, because it's a low acid food, it needs to be processed in certain ways. As we heard, it's important to process it safely. Kelp, specifically, I will be diving into, I study sugar kelp. So that's kind of mostly when I talk about seaweed in this presentation, that's what I mean. So kelp in particular has a lot of iodine. It contains protein and amino acids, such as glutamic acid, leucine, and alanine. Seaweeds also contain vitamins and minerals that I'll show a quick table in the next slide. And they lend umami flavor. They're naturally gluten-free and vegan, provided that they don't have any shellfish attached. And they're also a seasonal product that tend to be easily perishable. So processing and storing efficiently, as we've heard, is really important to capture the nutrients and potential of this great climate-minded food. So here's just a quick nutritional composition table. Keep in mind the amounts shown on this table are like 25 times greater than a serving size, so it's in 100 grams. But yeah, as we can see, we have a lot of sodium, calcium, potassium, magnesium, and phosphorus, B vitamins, vitamin C and A in some species. Again, I just want to highlight that there is a high level of iodine in seaweeds, especially in kelp. Iodine is a necessary nutrient, but is also something you don't want to overeat because it can cause health issues if you have too high of an amount. And yeah, so thanks to Maine Coast Sea Vegetables for compiling this helpful guide. And please note too that seaweeds have high fluctuations with seasons and growing conditions in their nutrient content. So that's just something to note as well. Food safety, thank you to Erin before for discussing this. I'm glad to know that you're thinking about the food safety of this, but just a quick overview, it must be harvested from certified waters. Seaweed from human consumption should avoid heavy metal contamination. So, and during harvest, seaweed must be refrigerated or kept at 40 degrees Fahrenheit to control bacterial growth. Raw seaweed has a short shelf life and begins to decompose quickly. So again, processing and storage is important. And because it grows in the ocean where crustaceans are, crustaceans should be labeled as an allergen if possible. So, and just note that seaweed food safety practices are just continuing to be researched, and yeah, there's growth to be done in kind of getting specific seaweed process details down. So some processing options, these are just some of them. Seaweed can be, in some circumstances, used fresh, can be cooked, dried, freeze drying. In our lab, here's a photo of, we have done some freeze drying of sugar kelp. It can also be fermented, blanched, frozen, and it can also be pasteurized using high pressure processing, which is a process method where food is already in the final storage container and is then passed through a brief high pressure chamber, which kills viruses, bacteria, etc. that could be in the product without heat. So kind of a unique option. Some of our current research goals and what I'm working on, again, with sugar kelp, I'm interested in creating kelp-based novel value-added products. So a focus of our processing to be food safe is to rapidly drop the pH of this low acid food, so that we're doing that either through fermentation or through acidification. So this first photo here, we're doing an experiment with the fermentation of sugar kelp using yeast as opposed to some more typical lactic acid bacteria fermentations. This has been a cool project. It's been challenging to get a sort of organoleptically acceptable product, so something that tastes good and is also safe. The second project is that we're trying to create a convenient kelp condiment that can be used or that can be processed using that HPP high pressure processing method that I mentioned, meaning that it could be put in a container and then pressurized safely. So both of these are in progress, and we're continuing to develop our formulations for both of them, and we'll be running tests this spring. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kiara. So next we'll move on to research for more on the production end. So Stephen Schott with Cornell Cooperative Extension's Marine Program is going to share some more of the research that he's been doing.
All right, thank you, Mike. Let me just. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly and just cover some of the things that I've been involved with seaweed aquaculture over the about last 10 years. So I do, much to the accolades that Sean had thrown out there for me, my real distinction is the fact that there are few and far between of people who specialize in macroalgae. We have a lot of phytoplankton people on the island. I do not do phytoplankton. I do macros. I do other marine plants as well. So that's my only distinction and expertise. And the fact that I really do like playing around in the lab and in the field with seaweeds. So Cornell got involved primarily, I've been working for Cornell for 22 years as a habitat, marine botany habitat restoration specialist. I focus more on higher marine plants, seagrasses, and then your coastal marsh plants. But occasionally my expertise in seaweed came into play, typically in monitoring eelgrass meadows or people having issues with nuisance algae blooms in coastal waters. It wasn't until 2016 we received funding from Suffolk County's Water Quality Protection and Restoration Program to run a feasibility study in the Aquaponics basically to test whether or not sugar kelp or seaweed aquaculture would be feasible on Suffolk County aquaculture lease grounds in the Aquaponics. We did a small scale vertical dropper lines. We had sites scattered throughout the Aquaponics all the way from Flanders Bay out to Orient Point to basically identify areas where kelp would best grow, what depths it would best grow at, and what kind of rates and the constituents of nitrogen and carbon, especially for bioextraction potential. So that's where I got started with seaweed as a real focus and not just an addendum or add-on to another active projects. Since then, I've become interested in propagation research. I've worked with Lazy Point Farms for the last 2 seasons. I've trained one commercial aquaculture facility, Heart Lobster, Liz Savage, who has really taken it to another level with production. And then also I've provided training to Islip Town Hatchery and Hempstead Town Hatcheries, and both of those hatcheries have been successful in producing kelp seed spools, which is basically the fundamental unit for growing sugar kelp commercially. As far as propagation research goes, we'd like to try to control our own destiny as far as when we can start to culture our kelp. Right now, we're limited by Mother Nature. Kelp goes reproductive in the fall. Once it's cued with shortening day lengths and cooling water temperatures. Typically in the past, that was mid to late October, but with global climate change and warming temperatures, we are seeing the kelp get a little confused. It's getting the short day cues in October, but water temperatures are still well over 60 degrees. And it really kind of messes up the cycle. So it's pushed our windows further and further into the fall, which once you've done your 5 to 6 weeks of culture in nursery and get your seed strings out, you're getting into Christmas or into early January, and that presents all sorts of issues with the field aspects. So we're looking at gametophyte culturing. We're looking at different methods of conditioning kelp to actually trick it into becoming reproductive when we want to, similar to what's used in shellfish aquaculture. And I'm also very interested in looking at propagation techniques for other species that are commercially valuable and local species. We've been involved again with Lazy Point Farms with aquaculture monitoring and assessment, looking at our growers' lines, collecting samples, taking measurements, and the such. We we'll probably continue to provide those services. Something that I'm interested in, I've done a lot of monitoring with seagrasses and other marine plants. For the most part, seaweeds are not monitored unless they're considered a nuisance or they have some kind of value. Well, now that kelp has a value, it stands that it could be commercially exploitable to the point where we could actually have impacts on our local populations. And that's something that I'm very interested in. And we've also discussed with David Berg, and I have been throwing around, and it's done in other spots around the world that harvest sugar kelp. They actually actively restore. So what they take out, they try to reseed. And that's done in a variety of different methods. And we're hoping to convince New York State DEC to allow us to do some experimentation in sugar kelp restoration, just to fortify our natural populations. And then finally, this is something, as a researcher, I don't get into the actual growing and aquaculture for the food aspects, but we're very interested in water quality and nutrient, nitrogen bioextraction, and potentially carbon sequestration are very high on the list. And seaweeds have a high potential to become a valuable tool in combating climate change and also improving coastal water quality. So this is something that Cornell has done in the past. We've done nitrogen bioextraction projects at Aquaponics with East Hampton Town. We're looking to do more of that work with East Hampton and Southampton in the coming years, and also potentially move into other areas of Long Island that show interest. So that's it for me.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you again to all of our panelists. I want to now transition into our Q&A session. I'll open the floor for questions for anybody online. Feel free to raise your hand or add questions to the chat box. I see we've got some there already. And then as you raise your hand, I'll call on you in the order that I see you come up. So are there any questions? And we'll start with Augie in the chat box. He's asked that he's heard anecdotally that our local oyster growers sometimes suffer from a New York branding problem because New York in general is associated with New York City and its polluted waterways. Does anyone think that there could be a significant branding issue with edible New York kelp products? I see some of our panelists have answered already in the chat box. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add?
Well, I'll add that the sugar kelp can only be grown in certified waters in New York. So they will be as safe as our shellfish, which are quite safe in New York. But to the bigger issue that was raised of the, oh, well, New York, it reminds me of New York City. That's a bigger issue. And I think that's one that the Oyster Growers Association can address along with the East Coast Shellfish Growers Association, because most of the kelp growers, as I mentioned, probably be oyster growers. So I think other shellfish growers on the East Coast have been successful in marketing their product across the country. So yeah, a real issue.
Mike, I'd like to add too to that is I do agree with Augie's assertion or suggestion. It has been said. We do have, as David pointed out, we do have a grower that's growing in Newtown Creek, which is definitely not something that you would want to eat that product, being one of the most polluted water bodies in the United States. However, I think the oyster growers have a pretty good grasp on their marketing and how to do this. My suggestions would be, yes, product of New York should be on there. However, maybe, Great South Bay kelp or Peconic Bay kelp or, things to that effect, the water body they're coming from, because there's certain, if we can get away from that New York alone and focus on the water bodies it's coming from, I think we'll have a better product placement and product acceptance.
Let me just add to what you just said, Steve. Yes, one of our growers is in the Gowanus Canal, one of the most polluted water bodies on the East Coast. But any kelp that we are processing this year is going to be from certified waters, and certainly not from the Gowanus Canal. I mean, we have a couple growers also growing in marinas. These are not certified waters. That's just for research purposes and non-food use, such as fertilizers. So we all need to be very careful about that.
Yeah, well, it sounds like there's two kind of main ways around that. And one is education, which is likely, unfortunately, probably the harder bit because there are so many people to educate, or being more regionally and locally specific as to where products are coming from, whether that's the specific bay or area in there. But two good approaches to try and address that. I do want to give Graham Hines, who's got his hand up for a little bit, an opportunity to unmute and ask his question.
Appreciate it, Mike, and thank you all so much for sharing. I really appreciate the work y'all are doing in this space. I am a researcher at American University here in Washington, D.C., thinking about climate policy. And my question was, it might be a little bit of sacrilege talking to a bunch of farmers, but is anybody thinking about pure sequestration? As in taking the seaweed and not turning it into a product, but just burying it or sinking it in the ocean? Or is anybody working towards that goal? I know there's a couple of organizations I've found that are engaged in that kind of that kind of a project, but I wasn't sure if this was the correct place to ask about that.
I've heard of those projects, or at least a suggestion that those should be projects, growing seaweed on a massive scale offshore. I think the issue right now is there's no mechanism to fund such a thing. And, you know, for all of us that are growing it on, you know, much smaller scale now, you know, we see value, you know, other values in the seaweed, food, clearly, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals. But yes, growing seaweed on that kind of scale is something that, you know, we should be looking towards, but that can't be done in some of the embayments in New York, or even for that matter in Connecticut and the other states, because you need much more space and you start to run into user conflicts.
David, we are actually currently, that's our business model, is our whole goal is actually to capture carbon in kelp farms, have them act as a sink, and then the kelp becomes a vehicle for driving that kelp into soil where it's then sequestered and removed from the atmosphere. Some of these projects that are capturing carbon in the kelp and then leaving it in the ocean or sinking it to the bottom of the ocean, that really doesn't remove that carbon from the atmosphere, so to speak, and it in a lot of instances can create more carbon. So we're working very carefully on trying to figure out how to close that cycle. And from our experience, what we're trying, really not launching a business here at Montauk Seaweed, it's really trying to start a seed to soil movement and really get large volumes. All the same reasons that you wouldn't want to eat kelp coming out of polluted waterways, those actually help. That a lot of those are beneficial to higher nitrogen levels and things like that in the fertilizer sector are a benefit. So we ultimately predict that New York is basically on the southernmost ecological fringe of where sugar kelp can grow. It's a New England, it likes cold, deep water to grow. We're inshore, shallow water growers here in New York. I want to give a shout out to my friend Liz, who's here too, who's actually a kelp farmer. I was out at her farm a few weeks ago. Hey, Liz Kelly is here. But I think that that's actually, David, and whoever asked that question from AU, I also went to school down in DC and spent a lot of time at Chef Jeff's. So big shout out to American U today. Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We've calculated that for every 1 pound of our Regency product, which is about 18 to 20 pounds of wet kelp dehydrated, goes into 1 pound of kelp powder. If you can believe that, it's a very challenging dehydration rate. But every 1 pound of the powder is equal to 2 pounds of carbon. And once you sink that in your soil and bury it, it's therefore removed from the overall carbon calculations. So ultimately, that's at the very center of our business model and what we're trying to create, above and beyond any of the benefits for growing vegetables or for livestock feed. Livestock is another story for probably another seminar, but the carbon capture capacity in there and methane reduction when you start feeding this kelp to certain livestock is also formidable. So those are pretty much, that's our primary goal, is figuring out how to use kelp as a carbon capture mechanism to bury it into soil or feed it to animals in order to start reducing carbon dramatically out of the atmosphere.
And I would add to what Sean said, and yes, that's all very true, but it's also a nitrogen capture vehicle. And one of the things that we're starting to look into is a nitrogen credit system for those farmers that are raising sugar kelp or other seaweeds for that matter, to give them credit for the amount of nitrogen they remove. Similar concept.
Thanks, David and Sean. So we did have some comments come in. One back to the marketing aspect and using New York State's Atlantic Ocean coast as a potential term and terminology. We've got Chef Carrie Heffernan indicating that in his restaurant doesn't have an issue with the New York name attached to oysters, that people are actually asking for them. So there are markets out there where the New York name is not hindering the sales, although I think based on others' experiences, there may be some markets where that is an issue. But there are other ways we've identified that you could get around that. And just clarifying here that, their seaweed for food production is going to be heavily regulated. They cannot come out of anywhere, and it's going to have to come out of certified waters. So that's a good, important message that we're going to need to get across to consumers to enhance that market. I know we've got Jason making a correction. There is a way to sink, if there was a way to sink seaweed into the deep ocean, that would mimic natural carbon sink in the oceans. And I see that the hand went down again. Did you have something to clarify? What was it? Hines, I don't remember the first name.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, I was typing it in the chat. I just really quickly wanted to follow up with Sean and David again. Thank you guys so much for the work you're doing. Thanks for your responses. I was wondering if you've gotten any pushback on your plans to bury seaweed, or the work you're doing in burying seaweed. Are you selling it as fertilizer, as this is going to enrich the soil, or is it just purely as like a credit for sequestering carbon?
Great question. And we are currently not selling this as a carbon credit or a nitrogen credit kind of product. The benefits, and Debbie Aller, who was just on this call from Cornell, they just completed the first study to do a apples to apples comparison with sugar kelp versus the existing kelp fertilizer marketplace. Without getting too into the weeds, kelp really is not a good fertilizer, so to speak. It's a biostimulant, which helps plants and vegetables and trees and things grow. Not really on the nitrogen, the NPK levels, but more because it's got auxins and cytokinins and specific things that just amplify and have vegetation growth. That's where we're currently marketing into. And as opposed to, we're not getting any opposition whatsoever. What we're getting is a big embrace that we have a local New York State produced fertilizer product from the sea, where the bulk, let's take Long Island, for example, upwards of 98% probably of the fertilizers on Long Island are synthetic nitrogen fertilizers that are imported off the island. So that's a big part to do with what's polluting the waterways. And again, there's graphics and videos on our website to demonstrate this more clearly. But no, everyone that we've been working with, the New York Botanical Gardens, Cornell Cooperative, Stone Barn Center, every of the leading thinking minds and activists in this space are all kind of jumping up and down in joy that we're creating a locally produced product that captures carbon, sequesters nitrogen, but primarily from a performance perspective, either performs equal or better than a lot of the synthetic fertilizers and things that are currently on the marketplace that often come from all over the planet and have enormous carbon footprints. And we used to talk about food miles, now we're talking about fertilizer miles. So we're creating a hyper-local solution to a lot of different problems.
Thanks, Sean. So we're coming close to time, but I want to see if there's any more questions, especially for maybe our food producing end? So the research being done at Cornell, our agencies regulating food production, or how about our microalgae producer, We Are the New Farmers? Any other questions for that end of the spectrum? Oh, any last minute questions in general? Otherwise, we'll move on to our next portion of today's webinar.
I have a question actually. Hi, can you hear me?
Hello. Yep.
Hi, yeah, thank you for giving this presentation. I just found out about it yesterday actually, so I'm glad to be able to join. For the food product producers, how are you thinking about marketing your products? Is it for everyday consumers, or are you looking to incorporate it into maybe large chains, that type of approach, or do you have kind of like a both approach? I guess this would go for the kelp and the algae people as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Any other? Go ahead, Jesse.
I'm happy to share our perspective. So the way the crop project thinks about it, our model is all B2B. So we are not marketing directly to consumers. However, of course, marketing both to our customers and then as well, just getting consumers on board is important. But we kind of see a twofold approach. One is products that are very focused on kelp, which there are some out there today that help get consumers excited and can really have that messaging around why everyone should be into kelp. We love that and think it's super important. And that's probably, in the grand scheme of things, going to be a smaller % of our volume. And in that sense, on that side, we kind of lean on those end customers to be doing the direct marketing to customers on all of the benefits. The other side of our business is we really think about it as an ingredient. And so think, we actually like to say our target is something like soy, or like, what if kelp could be a salt replacement, right? So we think of it more as like a hidden ingredient in quote unquote in food products that would have the benefit of increasing nutritional value while having this positive environmental impact without actually having to get customers to get excited about eating seaweed or change their habits. So we see kind of that the side of our business that will help really grow this into big volume and have a lot of the benefits. So that's sort of how we think about our model in terms of marketing specifically. We're again really talking to B2B. So when we go out to customers, half of it is around all of these functional benefits, whether it's vitamins for food or, there's a lot of beauty applications as well. There's a lot of consumer goods companies who are pretty worried about their scope 3 ESG emissions. So what if you could just incorporate this instead of name other commodity product here and have kind of an impact on your supply chain. And then the other really big thing we focus on is food safety, and that's come up, and we know that's a huge concern, and we're uber focused and investing there. So we just do a lot of talking about, trying to help people not be scared about what they might be incorporating. So that's a half answer, but it's a little bit how we're thinking about going to market.
Thanks, Jesse. Anybody else want to address that question? Kara, do you know where you're headed with your research?
Yeah, definitely. I was just going to comment. Thanks, Jesse, for all your insight on that. I think with ours, particularly the kelp paste that we're developing, that we're trying to pasteurize using HPP, we're envisioning that as kind of a direct-to-consumer product where it would be sold kind of like those squeezed tubes of herbs that you can see, like the cilantro mixed with oil that would be in the refrigerated section that consumers could add to anything that they wanted for some salt, nutrition, umami. So kind of, yeah, seeing it as a condiment or an additive and less as like a main food.
Great, thanks, Kiara. All right, and I see that there was one more question from Betty in the chat box. I think Sean shared a good link. I believe some colleagues in New Hampshire have a guide for other seaweeds that are edible that probably is applicable here in New York.
Or you can contact your local seaweed specialist.
Or contact Steve.
I was started to write type a response to that, but let me just say, so there are very few seaweeds, macroalgae, that are toxic. We have one species locally that is toxic, and it's a non-native invasive species, red seaweed, Gracilaria. And we do have a local species of Gracilaria. Technically, the only way to tell the difference between the two is to do a biomolecular analysis. So right now, as far as aquaculture goes, Gracilaria would not be a species I would be cultivating for a food source. The toxicity of the non-native has not really been evaluated in our range. It can be toxic under certain conditions. Certain conditions, it's fine. But for the most part, most seaweeds are edible. Indigenous peoples ate almost all of them. The green sea lettuce, the green leafy seaweed that you see typically would be probably growing on your shellfish cages in Great South Bay. That is edible. Just remember that when you're eating these, there's high salt content. Take that into account. For use in your gardens, they're fine. One of the recommendations I've made to people is if you're going to compost, set it as a year off product. So start it this year with plans to use it next year. This gives it a whole year to weather and kind of rinse that salt off and really break down and get into your compost and then use it. So every year you would constantly be setting yourself up for the next year. Because even dried and rinsed kelp especially can have a lot, really high salt content. And that you really could cause problems and burn your vegetable gardens. If you're looking to use it as mulch to get rid of weeds, that works fine just like that then. Yeah, so if you have questions, please feel free to contact me. That's what I'm here for. And I can point you towards other resources as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, everybody. I do want to start to wrap up the panel. I want to thank again all of our panelists for joining us here today. And we'll transition next into sharing you a quick cooking demonstration video by Cornell Cooperative Extension Suffolk County Marine Program. Unfortunately, it's not a seaweed cooking demo at the moment, but hopefully in the future we will have some. But I'll let Kristen talk to you a little bit more about the series as I bring up that video.
Yes, thanks, Mike. Cornell Cooperative Extension's Choose Local Fish initiative thought it would be really important to teach people how to cook seafood in their own homes. What we heard was that many people just are not comfortable cooking seafood at home. Eating it at a restaurant is one thing, but actually going to the fish market and figuring out what exactly to order and how to get it filleted and prepared. People struggle with that. So during COVID, especially when people were mostly cooking at home, we thought it was an opportune time to launch a series of how-to videos on how to cook with local seafood. So many of the recipes, some of the recipes are with familiar fish, but also many of them are with some less familiar, underutilized fish that are oftentimes less expensive. So we are trying to break down all the barriers and get everyone cooking fish, eating fish every step of the way. So this video series was created by culinary nutritionist Stephanie Sachs. She's in Montauk, and we connected with her through the East End Food Institute. And I'm really happy with how all of these videos came out. I hope you check them out and actually use them. This blackened whiting taco recipe that we'll show you today. Whiting is one of the fish that is landed in the highest quantities in New York, yet most of us have never eaten it, cooked with it. So we thought this was a really exciting recipe. Whiting is very inexpensive, but also this recipe can be used with basically any fish. It's very easy. All of Stephanie's recipes are very healthy, easy, nutritious, and very, very delicious as well. So I include a lot of them in my weekly rotation of meals. And like I said, use this recipe with any fish that you choose. So thanks for
Kristen.
watching.
Welcome to Cornell Cooperative Extension's Choose Local Fish, Local Seafood Cooking Demonstration videos. By choosing locally harvested fish, you can be sure that your food is fresh, indigenous, sustainable, and healthy. Each purchase of local seafood supports the economic viability of fishermen, local fishing communities, and small businesses. So let's join culinary nutritionist Stephanie Sachs in the kitchen as she shows you how to prepare this locally caught fish.
So here's our whiting. So whiting's an interesting fish, not a ton of meat, so I tried to get a little creative, and we're gonna do blackened whiting tacos. So I'm gonna lay these clean fillets on the baking sheet right here. And you can easily buy a pre-made blackened mix, which I'll show you in a moment, or you can make your own, which I'm also gonna show you. Preheating my oven to 350. To make your own blackened mix, I'm using white pepper, onion powder, paprika, garlic powder, red chili pepper, and then oregano. And then also I have this here, which is just a pre-made blackened mix that you can also opt into. So I'm gonna mix everything in a bowl. Gosh, the spices are so potent. Look how beautiful that is. I like to use my hands when I cook. And I encourage you all to do the same, and I'm going to douse the fillets with olive oil. So this is just an extra virgin olive oil, and I use this frequently in cooking. And then we're just gonna spread the blackened mixture onto these fillets. It's a very, very flavorful mixture. So you'll end up with a delicate fish with a strong, spicy flavor, which is actually perfect for a taco. It's that simple. And again, you can use other fish for this as well. And then it's gonna go in the oven. Probably gonna cook it for about 10 minutes, maybe 15. There you have it. So it's been about 10-15 minutes. This is what the whiting looks like. Absolutely beautiful. And it smells so good. And this is a really, really simple dish. So I'm heating some corn tortillas right now, which I'm gonna pull over here in about a second. And I'm gonna shred some Napa cabbage. You can use romaine lettuce, you can use some cabbage, whatever you have around, whatever you fancy. And so I have this, and then I'm gonna use some salsa, and you can use any brand that you like. So we're gonna use that. These are some corn tortillas and avocado. So, okay. So now we're gonna build our taco. We're gonna take some of the fish, just like so. And some of the whiting, you'll see there are bones, so you just wanna be careful as you pull it off and pick out what bones you see. It's very, very delicate fish, very delicate. So, just like that. And then you can take some of your lettuce or cabbage in this case, and you can take some salsa as well. And then just top it with some avocado, like so. And if you want to make guac, you can do that too. So this is your taco, just like this. good. Super simple, straightforward way to work with whiting.
Thank you for.
All right, thank you, everybody. So next, I just want to jump into real quick, go through some last resources and opportunities that are available up there, and I'll show you also where you can find more of those cooking videos and cooking demonstrations. All right, just gonna share my screen one more time. All right. All right. All right. So again, while we strive to make the summit free and accessible to all, we do rely heavily on our grants and donations and sponsorship to keep these activities going. If you're able, please consider supporting the summit by donating today. Any amount can ensure the summit is sustained for years to come. Some additional resources that are available, and I'll share some through the various partners that have been assisting with the summit today. We did work together with industry agencies, as well as various NGOs working in the seafood space across the state to develop seafood processing and marketing guidance documents. There are both regulatory guides as well as supplemental documents to support the content within those guides. And those are all available on the New York Sea Grant website. There are QR codes on each of these pages to access those. You can also use our new Linktree account to see a variety of New York Sea Grant seafood resources. In addition to the seafood processing guides, we have our seaweed processing and marketing guides, thanks to our seaweed processing and marketing task force. Again, there's our regulatory guide looking specifically at seaweed processing regulations and how to bring that product to market. And then a specific guide looking closer at the Food Safety and Modernization Act, which is what the food safety regulation that FDA subjects seaweed to. We have a variety of marketing resources that are available online to help businesses better market their local products. They're fully customizable. You can add your logos, QR codes, link to your websites, link to videos, include information on alternative names, source, sustainability, more about you or your business. Or if you're a culinary professional, you can include information about the preparation and use these to educate consumers and patrons in your establishment. We are offering now free seafood HACCP trainings for New York seafood producers. There is limited spots, but we have several courses coming up between now and mid to late May. So if anybody is a fisherman or farmer throughout the state of New York and you're interested in selling direct, or you're subject to the seafood HACCP regulation, need that HACCP training certificate, please get in touch with me. And you can sign up to participate in one of those trainings. Working with Cornell Cooperative Extension's Marine Program, the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association, as well as Suffolk County's Department of Economic Development and Planning, we were put out the first report on commercial fishing in New York. This report is now available online. Keep in mind, there's a limited number of respondents, about 67 in total of the more than 600 licensed and active fishermen that are out there. So we're looking to increase this over time. But this gives you a little bit of a glimpse into the lives of some of the fishermen, the fish being caught, the methods being used, and the challenges that they face day to day trying to bring fish to market and to make a living. So this is a resource to help educate buyers, consumers, regulators, as well as legislatures, to help them be more aware of what's happening in the state. If you are a fisherman or producer, please take the 2022 survey. It is available. There's a link in the report, so we can better reflect the entirety of our New York industry in the 2022 commercial fishing report. Cornell Cooperative Extension of Suffolk County has their local fish campaign. This is where you can find those video recordings that we showed just before this session. You'll find a map of Long Island seafood retailers. You'll see more cooking demonstration videos. You can get more information on the various local fish tasting events and information, as well as additional outreach and education materials that CCE has produced through their local fish campaign. The Great Lakes Fish Finder was now launched and available at freshfishfinder.org. This is specifically for fish and products for Great Lakes throughout the Great Lakes region. So if you're interested in knowing what's being produced and what products are available from our Great Lakes, please feel free to check out that website to find new products. Grow NYC, one of our partners on this, has been running and grows the green markets in New York City, all throughout New York and the 5 boroughs. Grow New York City also runs some environmental programs that transform communities block to block and empower all New Yorkers to secure clean and healthy environment for future generations. In addition to a food access and agriculture program, which is transforming their regional food system and ensuring that all New Yorkers have access to the freshest, healthiest local seafood. So that concludes our session for today. I want to thank everybody for coming. Encourage you to look out for the last 2 events of the Seafood Summit for 2022. Tomorrow we have our in-person event at the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York. And then Friday we have our last virtual session, which will focus on New York fisheries. And those both, Thursday starts at 1, Friday starts at 2 o'clock. You can find more information and register at www.nycgrant.org/seafood summit. So thank you all for attending today, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.